This is the story of one man's survival against almost insurmountable odds during the Second World War. His name was Joe Byrne, who trained as a blacksmith in Sydney before the war. It turned out to be useful experience for the 21-year-old, who later found himself being used as slave labour for nearly 3 years in a Japanese steel plant in a notorious prison camp known as Naoetsu. Joe, who was a member of the 2nd 20th Battalion of the 8th Division's 22nd Infantry Brigade, was among 300 Australian soldiers who ended up in Camp 4B after being captured during the fall of Singapore in 1942 and shipped to Nagasaki. When I sat down to talk to him about the experience more than 15 years ago, I thought it was amazing he'd survived. 60 of his comrades perished during their ordeal. This is Joe's story, told for the first time on camera.
We landed in Nagasaki, overnight on the station, into the train, and then we pushed off up to Moji. That's on the Honshu side of the inland sea, as they call it. There's a tunnel that goes straight under. Once we got on the train, we didn't get off till we got to Naoetsu. We were starving. The big thing was, now we've come out of there, out of those train, the ship and that. I had a pair of boots, no socks, pair of shorts, short sleeve shirt. I'm in the tropics, aren't I? We had no underwear or anything like that because Singapore had fallen. We had no store to go to get any. And of course we didn't have any suitable clothing for the thing. And then the first lot died of pneumonia. Because they got into the snow and that was it. And they weren't healthy enough. And me being fortunate with being on that furnace, I wasn't cold in the winter. I was working in a spot where I could get warm. The others couldn't. They had to just work hard to get warm. But that's how it was there, and they were dying of various things. You see, and the trouble was, when you've got somebody that's sitting with you with a lump of wood, or giving you a prod with a bayonet or a rifle butt, you don't get better.
So how vicious were the guards at this stage?
I think 3 or 4 of them in the camp survived not being hanged.
Now tell me about life, day-to-day life in the camp itself, the living conditions and what it was like. Can you describe it to me?
No, the thing was, what you did, when we went onto the furnaces proper, working on the furnaces, there were 2 shifts, day shift, night shift. And every 5th day, you went from day to night, which meant instead of you did 12 hours of daytime, 14 hours of a night, 18 hours every 5th day to go from day to night, to turn you round. And it was, naturally enough, it wasn't real good conditions. And you had the guards and that marched you out to camp, from camp. And of course they would, for no excuse at all, they didn't need an excuse, they'd just walk in. Someone might be talking and they were talking a bit loud, and you heard them. He'd come over and knock them down, kick them. You always got that. The one thing about the Japanese, they always believed in dancing, and it was usually on your head. You know what I mean? You'd get a real good kick, huh?
One of the guards you remember was called Fishface, I understand.
Yeah.
What do you recall of him?
He was one of the greatest mongrels of a bloke you'd ever wish to meet. Yeah, see, and they called him, some of them called him Smith the Spy. He had the type of glasses that they told us all Japanese soldiers wore, which was a lie, of course, but he had big round glasses, just round glasses. He had a pinhead, and he had real rubbery lips, you know, real thick rubbery lips, and a skinny head. And they used to call him, when we first went there, we called him Smith the Spy, because every time you'd catch him, he'd be just peek around the corner or something. All you could see was one eye and the big glass, you know, the big glass, and he's hiding behind that. And then they used to call him Smith the Spy. And later on they called him Fish Face, because his face was not unlike, in comparison, to a parrotfish that they catch off the rocks, you know.
And what did he do? What sort of behaviour did he adopt?
Oh, he was a master of clouting you with the old wire stick.
The dog walloper.
Oh, dog walloper. Oh, Jesus, he used to give him some. And he used to get other guards that normally wouldn't be too bad. He'd call them over and he'd get on, you know, and make them hit them too. And of course they got to like it. They used to belt you. They belted you for nothing. Most of the people were hit about the head. Some of them got arms broken, legs broken. I got a mouthful of teeth knocked out.
So there were vicious blows.
Oh yeah. They were blows all right.
Can I just ask you about the food rations you had then, the diet you were having every day?
Well, what did they have? Seaweed. You know, kelp seaweed that's like that. They have that and they'd stew that up. And I'll tell you what, it's bloody awful. Then there's that other little weed. There's quite a number of weeds, kelps, and that they have, seaweed, that they eat in Japan. Yeah, some was just like sticks. Look, I used to say, if it looks like it and it tastes like it, it is a stick. And it was. But it was a type of a seaweed. And they'd have a sort of a stew made out of that. All they'd do is add water to it.
So there's no meat?
Christ, what's that stuff? All the time we were over there, I don't think we had meat till one day. They had a stew, came out, dog meat. I saw blokes that were starving. And they've just given us, whoever wants this? If they offered it to me, I'd take it, because I'd eat anything at all. I wouldn't like it, but I'd make sure I kept it down, and that's the only way to survive with those people. And this bloke, he says, I couldn't look Darky in the face again. He said, if I ate that.
That was his dog?
Yeah, dog meat, yeah. And then one time we got a bit of whale meat. And it was no cop either. I mean, people eat it over there. I know they eat it in Japan too. They don't use whale like whale for whale oil only. They eat anything that can be eaten.
How much weight did you lose during this time?
Well, I was 13 stone when I got on the boat to go to Japan, and when I came out, I was about 7 stone 8.
So you must have been very weak, physically.
Oh, you weren't the strongest bear in the pub, yeah.
And what about the other men you were living with?
They were in a similar position. those that survived, they were in this. I used to always say, when people had asked me about it, I used to say, don't forget, I wasn't Robinson Crusoe. There was 300 of Aussies there, 300.
60 of them died, though, didn't they, in the camp? What was it like? What was the mood like, knowing that so many of your fellow men were dying all around you?
Well, all you had to do was concentrate on that you weren't going to die and you were going to get out of it. Made you more determined to get out of it. I used to say to fellas, they'd say, oh, Joe, we're not going to get out of this. And I'd say, you mightn't, but I am.
Can you remember the day of liberation and what it was like in the camp?
Well, the day of liberation for us was one of those ones that we didn't know that something was on till Bobby, he's a South Australian. He was a towman for the Japanese. He was looked after the head of the camp, and he was in his office doing office work and that for him. And he come out and he says, I think it's finished. I think it's finished. Well, I says, yeah, Bob, what's finished? And he said, the war. And I says, of course it is. That's why we're still here, and we're just about to go out on night shift. And he says, oh. He walked around scratching his head. Then the guards come out, we fall in to go out to work, you know. And I'm waving him like I'm waving on us. Robert, what did you say? He says, I'm sure I was right. And all of a sudden, big head man comes out. There'll be no night shift. Turned round and walked inside. And he said, what did I tell you? What did I tell you? So the guards themselves didn't know much about it. But the next morning, about 11 o'clock, I think it was, they come in, the guards came in. One bloke threw himself on the ground, thumping the ground with his hands and screaming and going on. And they're putting on a lot of tantrums like your children do when they're little, you know, not getting their own way. And that went on. There would be no day shift. There'd be no night shift. There'd be no day shift. And then he came out this day, 2 guards, one each side of him, and another fellow walking out in front with a box. You've got to have a box to stand on. Put his hand out, the bloke hails his hand, he gets up on the box, and he looked like if he was terrified being so high off the ground. But it made him look good, didn't it? He looked right over the top of everyone. And that's what he said. And I'll tell you the quote for that was, because it'll never leave me, owing to the cheating of the Americans, the Japanese have brought the war to the conclusion point. Now that was all these English, he studied that right up, and then they give it to the interpreter, and that's how it came out. And we says, and of course, our blokes, I remember we all stood around, 400 Americans and 300 of us others we had some of the British troops were still there, some of the Dutch troops were still there, and there was the Aussies. So there'd be nearly 700 people in the parade. They're all there. Oh, that's good. And one bloke said, the bloody war is over. And of course, this is 4 or 5 days after it was actually stopped, after the 15th. So you say you're up into the 20s. And of course, then planes come over. When we looked up, there's the big US star on the side of them, you know. And then one bloke went round slowly, and there's a bloke with a light blinking. And I remember a bloke, Chief Petty Officer Gansey was his name. And he was a a Swedish American, you know. He must have been 6'6", and he'd evidently been a big footballer. He was that wide, and he walks out in the thing, and he just picked up a couple of bits of paper, like that. And he just faced the plane, stood to attention, and then give his signals, you know. And he told them about who was in the camp, the senior officer, Lieutenant Commander Fitzgerald of the US Submarine Corps. And then he told some of the airmen that were on board, and this bloke's blinking back that so-and-so had been decorated with whatever medal it was, you know, like the American Star and that, Navy Star and Navy Cross. And he got those, and there was a fella, what is his name? Meadow. No, he was a runner. And
Zamperini.
Louis Zamperini. And Louis Zamperini was an army pilot. Of course, they're different to us. We've got Air Force. They've got Navy Air Force, Army Air Force, and the Marine Air Force. And anyhow, Louis Zamperini, they'd named a sporting field after him. While all the war's going on, he'd not only got a decoration, but he got a sporting field named after him. And that's Louis. And he was a lovely man.
What did you feel like on that day? Were you relieved? Were you just so ecstatic that the war was over? How did you feel?
That's how I felt. Well, the war's over. Now what do we do? I'm going uptown, I said.
The so-called forgotten story of the worst POW camp in Japan is told in my book, Hell's Heroes. It's a gripping history of the men of Camp 4B that went largely unreported at the time. Yet remarkably, it's remembered every year at a ceremony on the site of the camp where descendants of the prison guards and those familiar with the atrocities that unfolded pay homage to those who died, worked and suffered there, both as prisoners and guards. Hell's Heroes, published by Harper Collins, is available as an ebook on Kindle. It's a riveting testament to man's endurance and the will to live against all odds. This is Roger Maynard reporting, with special thanks to the late Michael Crouch, founder of Zip Industries, who helped to make this film possible.
In